Hello and welcome. I'm Nitin Gokhale and you are on StratNews Global. Afghanistan, by all accounts, is in a flux. Americans and American allies like Australia are quitting the country in a hurry, leaving the Afghans in the lurch, as it were. The Taliban has played the game of patience since 2001 and, helped by Pakistan's ISI, regained its strength and influence over these 17-18 years. Now, it is dictating the terms to not just the government in Kabul, but also to Afghanistan's neighbours. It has warned countries around Afghanistan not to allow American military bases once the American and the NATO forces leave. The Afghan forces, steeled by years of conflict, are of course fighting back wherever possible. There's almost a civil war like situation in Afghanistan, and the future seems very uncertain. So, where does this all leave the Afghan people, and more importantly, countries like India, which has invested not just monetarily but through cultural diplomacy and through education and other means to Afghan people, with Afghan people? To discuss all this, we are on this program, our our daily program, Gist. And to join me on the Gist program is a very special guest. But you are on Gist on Thursday evening. To discuss the situation in Afghanistan that obtains currently, I could not have had a better guest than Lieutenant General R.K. Sawhney, former Director General Military Intelligence and former Deputy Chief of the Indian Army, and someone who has specialized in Afghan affairs, someone who was a close friend of the late Shah Mahmood in those years when the resistance fighters were fighting the Taliban, and someone who has watched closely, visited the country a number of times, and knows the situation intimately. General Sawhney, welcome to this program and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nitin, for having me on your show.
Sir, as you are aware, the Taliban is now dictating terms to the Americans, despite long duration talks that they've had with the Americans. They are now saying that while you leave the country, you must not have any trace of your presence in the country itself, but also threatening the neighbors around Afghanistan that they should not allow American bases to operate from. And the violence, of course, has increased. What is your take on the current situation?
I think, Nitin, what has happened is that somehow or the other, the Americans have conceded Afghanistan to Taliban. So Taliban are now almost having a victory lap. When you tell these people that you are going to leave by a certain date, and you have started already packing, so you create an environment in which everybody starts feeling insecure. So in this environment, the Taliban have started what I would call a psychological warfare. They are not only, waiting for the Americans to leave, but they're also dictating terms. They are telling the neighboring countries, in the Central Asian countries, that should they allow the American bases in their, territory, they would have to pay a price for it. And surprisingly, there is no reaction from the Americans, which means that they are accepting this dictation by the Taliban. This would have a large repercussion subsequently. As it is, they are leaving this strategic space, and leaving it in the way they are leaving is not good as far as the country, that is Afghanistan, and the region is concerned. But this, I think, is something which requires to be pondered on, the way the Taliban are behaving at the moment.
Indeed. In fact, you have long experience of Afghanistan and, of course, looking at Taliban combating their presence and their dominance. So as you see it, do you think the Afghan national forces, the army and the police, are in a position to take on the Taliban by themselves, or they will need help from outside? Or have they been trained well enough and stocked well enough to take on the challenge from the Taliban?
This, I think, is a slightly complicated question. But I can tell you one thing, that over a period of time, especially in last 10 years, Americans have invested heavily in so far as training the Afghan forces were concerned. And I would say they have done a decent job out of it. They have managed to train the officer corps, and which, of course, we also have a hand in it, that we trained them in our academies. They have also trained the troops on the ground, and they have also equipped them for the counterinsurgency role in such a fashion that I can say at the moment, the forces, the Afghan army, is one of the better trained armies in Central Asia. I think I can compare it favorably with any of them. And another point which I admire in them is that for last 1 year, more than 1 year, they are on their own. Actually, the Americans are more in a mentor's role and they are what you call advisory role, but they are carrying out the operation on their own. And I can tell you, I have myself taken part in a lot of counterinsurgency operations. This army has suffered the number of casualties which could have broken any other army. And I'm not saying that they haven't had desertions, but they have still held forth. So you see, when you analyze their performance, and especially the performance of their special forces, I can say they have done incredibly well. Any other army would have broken off, any other army would have disintegrated. But you must give the devil the due where it is due. They are young officers, and quite a few of them have been trained in the Indian military academies, are doing extremely well. I mean, I've seen them commanding they are now at reached a level, they will be commanding the battalions and a little above that. They're doing very well. And they have also been able to manage the, should I say, the logistics also in a very, what do you call, appreciable manner. They have also established sort of a medical evacuation where they get the people back and what do you call, treat them, those who are wounded. So all said and told, they have been able to stand on their own for last 1 year. And despite the propaganda of the Pakistanis and Taliban, they have not conceded ground in very many places. One thing we must understand that with a limited force, and I'm at the best of the time when the Americans and the NATO forces were there, they were not capable of guarding each and every inch of territory. It is not possible. So the Afghan army's reach into the countryside is limited, very, very sort of it's understandable. But wherever they are deployed, I think they have not done badly at all. So
In
I can
fact,
say one thing.
yeah, indeed. So, in fact, the latest news says that some 120 Taliban fighters have been killed by the Afghan forces in the last 24 hours. And many of them, 70 odd, have been wounded. So, every day there is a fight, and the Afghan forces are coming out very creditably, as you mentioned. I think years of training, years of practical experience has really steeled them very well, as you are somebody like you has observed. But I wanted to take you to a larger question. The Taliban's threat to the Central Asian nations to say that you should not have American bases. Is this driven or instigated by Pakistan's ISI? Would you think? Because you have watched that space for a long time, and nobody better than you to tell us whether this is the correct appreciation.
I think I entirely agree with your appreciation, Nitin, because what has happened is that ISI indirectly is sending a message to the Americans that if you have to have bases, then you only can have bases in Pakistan. It's a very, very clever ploy. Because, if supposing, now I'm telling you that these goons, these ISI people, if supposing they manage to have bases in the countries surrounding Afghanistan, then the clout the Pakistanis want to enjoy, that will go away. You see, these people want their bases to come back into Pakistan because that would give them the leverage with the Americans. And I feel, in a way, you see, one would have thought that with their close linkages with China, the China would not be very sort of happy with it. But I feel that there is a involvement of the Chinese also into that. So basically, they want the bases of the Americans in what do you call
Pakistan.
Pakistan, so that they continue to have a leverage with them as they used to have earlier on. So I think this is something which we have to watch. We, the Americans, also have to watch.
That's true. But there are some other reports that one has heard, and I think you can confirm or deny them or sort of refute them, is that the Taliban is no longer as deeply or as strongly or as resolutely controlled by the ISI, because the ISI is wanting the Haqqani network to be at the front and center of the new regime in Kabul. Is that something you're hearing, or is just speculation, sir?
I think you are absolutely right. To say that the Taliban are completely one force, there are factions within which don't come to fore when you look at them as a whole. But ultimately, in the end, there are factions within, and those factions will become stronger. When they come to divide the spoils of war. It is not so easy, you see, for them to, and it is not correct because sometimes we get carried away and we start looking at Taliban as if they are a very cohesive, well-disciplined force. Of course, they are fighters. Naturally, these goons have been fighting, and they are the mercenaries. But to say that they are a cohesive force, I mean, under one political leadership, I think would be overestimating their capacities. They have their factions within, and as the times pass, as the civil war proceeds, those fissures will come to fore and they'll be quite visible. So I think that is something to be watched. So to start giving credit to the Taliban as if they are a conquering army, which is absolutely bent upon, liberating this nation, which I mean, in any case, is ridiculous. These goons, I saw them, what they did to this country. But then
Sir,
I was one of the few people who reached Kabul 2 days after they had been thrown out, the Taliban. And I
right.
can't tell you the horrors they committed on this country. In last 20 years, most of the urban areas and other areas have literally gone about leaps and bounds towards development, education, etc. and all. So I don't think there is going to be enthusiasm for these people who want to push them back into the medieval times. So that is the
Indeed,
point.
indeed. In fact, the Afghan society and the young Afghan population has changed completely. I think it's no longer amenable to the Taliban kind of dictatorship, perhaps, as one hears and one interacts with young Afghan people. They're articulate, well educated, have the mind of their own. And as we see in the strategic and defense space, they have carved a niche for themselves. So, in that respect, even if Taliban starts controlling the countryside, it's going to be difficult for them to govern and tame the resurgent Afghan society. Is what one would think as a distant observer. But your thoughts on the other opposing forces? I mean, opposing to Taliban forces, would there be some kind of pushback from the erstwhile Northern Alliance? Is that something being looked at? And what would be India's role? I mean, I want to first start with what should be India's role, what would be India's role, and then come to the Northern Alliance if there is a Northern Alliance.
Uh, Nitin, we have always supported the people of Afghanistan. We have always supported them, and we have supported them in the way a civilized country supports another sovereign country. We have actually trained them, we have educated them, we have given them the infrastructure. And I want to tell you, it was so amazing that I was coming back from Kabul, and there were about 40 girls coming back, and they were all coming back to be trained as nurses. So what can be a better way of doing it? I have met these students in the DU. I have met these students in the, what do you call, in Bangalore. And whenever you meet them, they are very bright lads, very bright ladies, absolutely articulate and educated. Most of the civil services we have trained them, and we are proud of it. The diplomats we have trained, and the officers I talked to you about. We are people who have trained their young officers. And I always am very proud of them because we have inculcated with them the values which a democratic country should have. So that is something which cannot be taken away from us. So that is the role we have played, and we'll continue to play that role. We have never played any other dirty role like our Western neighbor is doing. And the countryside, when you go, there is a respect for us because they always see us that we have done something constructive. We have not discriminated in any of the places. And it's very strange that our development projects go across the country, irrespective of the difficulties which were there. I recollect once I was there, and there was the electricity, lines coming from this place, Uzbekistan. It was an impossible act, because it was a very difficult area. And Jayant Prasad, I think, was the ambassador. And we went to the inauguration, and I was there. I mean, I don't know, I happened to be there. And when I saw the job done by that company, it was absolutely amazing. And then I remember the hospital, the Indira Gandhi Hospital. Nitin, when I reached there after 2 days of these goons, the Taliban being thrown out, there were only, I think, some paludrine tablets and bandages. But subsequently, when I went there, it was one of the finest hospitals where the women and children were treated. And you know what these people did? They killed 4 of those doctors. And I felt so horrible after that because I had met them in the DA's office. So our role, in my view, for all times and in future also, will be that of a constructive help. We never try to dominate anything. We inculcating in the army also, as the army should behave in a democratic country under the civilian leadership. So you will find the army officers, the senior people who are serving in the Afghan army today, unlike the Pakistanis, we haven't inculcated in them that they are bound to rule. We have told them they are bound to serve. And
Right.
I met a major who had trained in NDA, and he told me that. He says he's proud of being trained by the Indians because he knows what is his place in the nation.
Oh, indeed, I come across so many of these people who are proud of having educated themselves in India and across the country in India. But as you said, the younger generation in Afghanistan is not likely to accept the Taliban's medieval practices or their rule of Sharia as they want to impose on this country. I think that is the hope that the world must have about Afghanistan. And India, as you rightly pointed out, has been playing a very constructive role, has given Afghanistan whatever it needed rather than imposing something like other Western nations or even Pakistan. And Pakistan has only exported terror to Afghanistan. I think that is the stark difference between Indian and Pakistani approach. But finally, General Sawhney, one final thought from you. If the Taliban continues to do the war of attrition, what should the world do? Because if the Americans are not willing to stand up to them or stand with them, with the Afghan people, then we'll have to have no other option but to strengthen the hands of the Afghan National Army and the Afghan people and the Afghan democracy, I guess. What's your thought? Final thoughts?
I'm absolutely with you. The world should not forget them. The world should not concede this victory to Taliban. The world should stand by the Afghan people, by the Afghan Republic, by the Afghan army, and not unnecessarily get bulldozed by these goons, these Talibans. And that is where otherwise we'll be letting them down. I mean, it completely moves me, and I'm talking as a soldier, I get moved very rarely. But I will be completely, I'll be very, very sad if these people, completely destroy the gain of last 20 years. What sort of administration they're going to impose upon them? That is something the world has to think. And the world just cannot forget. I mean, the Americans just can't forget. You see, they must continue to support these people in whatever way we can. And India must continue to support them the way we have been always supporting them. We are with the people, and we must continue to make sure that their morale is not lowered, that we do not take part in the psychological warfare which has been unleashed by the Taliban and by the Pakistanis, that they are just inches away from the victory. I want to tell them that these people who have gained whatever they have gained in the last 20 years, they are going to fight for it. And I think I'll be very much ashamed of the world if they abandon them. Because abandoning them means that they're going to push them back into the medieval times after showing them the dreams, what any nation should dream about. So after so much of investment, I think we must continue to hold their hand, hold the hand of the republic, hold the hand of the democratic institutions, hold the hand of the national army, hold the hand of these people, the young people whom we all have trained. We have invested in them, and we have invested in them in a very, very positive fashion, not in the negative fashion like our Western neighbors have done. So we should not allow them the luxury of a victory lap. That would actually, in my view, would be a shame on region and the world.
Indeed, very, very well spoken, General Sawhney. It shows how much empathy you have, how much you love that country because of your involvement for last almost 2.5 decades there. And thank you very much for your thoughts. And we hope that last word has not been said about Afghanistan. And we will see that the jury is still out about who's going to win and how the Taliban will be prevented by the civilized world from taking over Kabul again or taking over Afghanistan again. Thank you very much once again for joining me and giving me a great insight into our viewers too. We will come back to you when there are more such occasions, General Sawhney. But for the moment, thank you very much. And viewers, don't forget to send us feedback, comment on our feedback section, and of course, like us on our social media platforms. You know where to reach us. And of course, keep supporting StratNews Global. We try to bring you a different kind of information and reporting from what you normally see elsewhere. And therefore, we need your continuous support. For the time being, it's goodbye.